To visit Harlem or not to visit Harlem? That is the question for some. Hello everyone, it's Suzy Q here, welcoming you back to another episode of My Stage, Your Platform. Today's video is going to be about the most storied neighborhood in New York City, Harlem. A community enriched with art, literature, and culture. There is so much more to this special place that has unfortunately been misrepresented at large in the past. But in recent years, Harlem has had a profound impact on the United States and the world, and has been gaining lots of momentum and exposure. Today, many citizens and tourists who have read about its history and development flock in daily to experience for themselves the Harlem, the neighborhood of Manhattan, which was nicknamed by some the Black Mecca and to others Heaven, with its motto being making it. Hence the reason for this video today. I want to share with you all what I have come to learn and love about Harlem. This is the history on Harlem from its prominent era to its rough times, ending with its reformation and transformation. Please be advised that this is just a summation video of certain events which took place in Harlem in the past, and how far the neighborhood has come from many adversities to becoming gentrified. Some significant names that you know may not be necessarily mentioned in this video but will be in future videos. Thank you and enjoy. Harlem is a neighborhood located in Upper Manhattan in New York City, bounded by Frederick Douglass Circle, St. Nicholas Avenue, and Morningside Park, all on the west, with 155th Street and the Harlem River on the north side, 5th Avenue to the east, with Central Park North to the south. The Greater Harlem areas of several neighborhoods extends west to the Hudson River, north to 155th Street, east to the East River, and south to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Central Park, and also East 96th Street. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard is also 125th Street, which is a two-way street that runs east-west in the New York City borough of Manhattan from 1st Avenue on the east of Marginal Street, which is a service road for the Henry Hudson Parkway on the Hudson River in the west. It is considered the main street of Harlem. Notable buildings along 125th Street include the Apollo Theater, which opened in 1914 as Hertig and Simon's new burlesque theater. It became the Apollo Theater in 1934 and opened to black patrons. Before that, it had been a white-only venue. In 1983, both the interior and exterior of the building were designated as New York City landmarks. The building was added to the National Register of Historic Places. About an estimate of 1.3 million people visit the Apollo Theater every year. The theater has a capacity of 1,506 seatings. Other notable buildings along 125th Street besides the Apollo Theater include the Adam Clayton Powell Jr. State Office Building, the Hotel Theresa, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Mount Morris Bank Building, Harlem Commonwealth Council, the Harlem Children's Zone, the Church of St. Joseph of the Holy Family, and the former West End Theater, which is now home to the LaGree Baptist Church. This is a picture of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's very first president, giving a speech in front of the Hotel Theresa in Harlem in 1960, with Malcolm X sitting behind him in the background to his right. Let's take a brief look at the Morningside Park, a park worth visiting with your families. Locals refer to Harlem as Uptown. As a settlement, it traces its roots back to the early Dutch pioneers. Its name originated from the Dutch city of Haarlem, which is spelled with a double A in the Netherlands. It became part of New York City in 1873 after its value as an independent agriculture center had declined. Before their arrival, the area was inhabited by the wecguaesgeek, a Native American Indian band. They were also called manhattoe and Manhattan by the Dutch settlers, and were a Munsee-speaking band of Wappinger people who once upon a time lived along the east bank of the Hudson River in the southwest of today's Westchester County in New York City and down into the Bronx. The Dutch settlers, along with other Native Americans, most likely the Lenape, occupied the area in a semi-nomadic basis and formed the Harlem Flatlands. In 1660, under the leadership of Peter Stuyvesant, whose name, by the way, has been given to various landmarks throughout New York City, including the famous Stuyvesant High School and Stuyvesant Town, the settlement of Harlem was officially incorporated. During the American Revolution, the British burned Harlem to the ground. It would take a very long time to rebuild as it grew slowly than the rest of Manhattan during the late 18th century. Starting in 1868, Harlem had an economic boom after the American Civil War. The New York and Harlem Railroad, coupled with the interborough rapid transit and elevated railroad lines, helped the economic growth of Harlem because they connected Harlem to the lower and midtown Manhattan. As the neighborhood continued to serve as a refuge for New Yorkers, an increasingly large amount of people coming north were poor and Jewish and Italian. In the 19th century, it was predominantly occupied by Jewish and Italian Americans. But during the Great Migration in the 20th century, African American residents, escaping the South of Jim Crow laws and the culture of lynching violence era, turned to the northern industrial cities to seek better jobs and education for their children. They arrived in large numbers. Puerto Rican population also increased during this time. In 1904, hundreds of homes remained unsold, and thousands of new apartments in Harlem remained vacant. Philip A. Payton Jr., an African-American real estate entrepreneur, convinced struggling white landlords that he could fill their empty houses with African-American families. They agreed because African-Americans at the time were willing to pay higher rents. Some white property owners, however, tried to force black residents out of Harlem. Also, some white landlords who rented to black families were sued by their white neighbors, and many black families were evicted. With the prejudice, discrimination, and real estate war against blacks in Harlem beginning to reach a record high, Payton formed the African American Realty Company in 1904. The company bought and leased houses for African American occupancy. Since Negroes settling down in Harlem was a major hassle for white people, they evicted any white resident living inside the building and resold that vacancy to black people. Payton and his company continued to acquire various properties in Harlem. This really scared white people and they began fleeing Harlem. This was known as the White Flight. Numerous houses, block after block, were left deserted. By 1913, Harlem was home to 50,000 African Americans. Soon, they started opening and owning businesses in Harlem. The majority of white shop owners in Harlem were not happy about this transformation, so white shop owners hired Irish mops from Hell's Kitchen and the Tenderloin District to scare off black shop owners. Black shop owners fought back by hiring local men like William Bob Hewlett to protect their businesses. They managed to run the Irish mob out of Harlem. Philip Payton Jr., who played a big role in helping African Americans migrate to Harlem, died in 1917. He was later known as the father of Harlem. By 1919, Harlem emerged as the capital of Black America. In 1910, the population in central Harlem was about 10% of Black people. In the 1920s, it grew to about 32%, and eventually, that percentage would also increase to 70% in the 1930s. After the First World War ended, racial tension began to boil over the United States. In France, African American soldiers had a taste of what freedom and respect was like, an experience which they never had at home in America. They were determined to fight for equal treatment, but found that discrimination against blacks was just as present as it was before the war. An example of this racism was the case of Wilbur Little, an African American soldier who was lynched in Blakely, Georgia upon his return from service after ignoring threats from a group of white men to never wear his uniform in public. Additionally, the fleeing of African Americans from the South to the North further increased this racially motivated violence and segregation in the North, as well as the regeneration of the Ku Klux Klan. All of these issues contributed to the rising racial tension, which resulted in the riots that affected several major cities in what was known as the Red Summer of 1919. In 1916 to 1917, the New Negro movement was founded by Hubert Harrison. He established the first organization, the Liberty League, and the first newspaper, the voice of the Negro movement in 1917. This movement energized Harlem and beyond with its race-conscious and class-conscious demands for political equality, an end to segregation and lynching, as well as calls for armed self-defense when appropriate. Harrison also edited The New Negro in 1919 and authored When Africa Awakes, the inside story of the stirrings and strivings of the new Negro in the Western world in 1920. He was given the name Father of Harlem Radicalism. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People played an important role in the awakening of the Negro Renaissance, which was a cultural component for the new Negro movement. The NAACP officials W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, Walter White, and Jesse Redmond Fawcett provided financial support, aesthetic guidance, and literature to this cultural awakening. According to the NAACP, this cultural component of the new Negro movement provided the first display of African American culture of self-expression. In the 1920s and 1930s, Harlem became associated with a major African American culture movement. Central and West Harlem were the center of Harlem Renaissance, with the outpour of various artists which extended to poetry, novels, theater, and visual arts. Before the famous Apollo Theater opened on 125th Street on January 26, 1934, there were other theater companies like the American Negro Theater, the New Heritage, and the Harlem Suitcase Theater. Over 125 entertainment venues were in operation in the 1920s and 1930s. Besides theaters, there were lounges, cafes, taverns, superclubs, rib joints, dance halls, as well as bars and girls. 133rd Street was known as Swing Street. During the Prohibition era, it became known for its cabarets, speakeasies, and jazz scene, and was nicknamed Jungle Alley because of the interracial mingling on the street. Some jazz venues like the Renaissance Ballroom and Savoy Ballroom were integrated, but other venues including the Cotton Club, where Duke Ellington played, and Connie's Inn were restricted to whites only. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, grand theaters were torn down or converted to churches. Harlem's reputation for crime began somewhere in the 1930s with job losses during the Great Depression and the deindustrialization of New York City after World War II. Rates of crime and poverty increased significantly. About 25% of people were unemployed in the early 1930s, and the employment prospect stayed low for decades. Traditionally black businesses, domestic services, and some manual labor were also taken over by other ethnic groups. There were several riots, including the years of 1935 and 1943. Major industries left New York City altogether, especially after 1950 and early 1960s, where a series of rent strikes were organized by neighborhood tenants, led by Jesse Gray, an American civil rights leader and a politician, the Congress of Racial Equality, Harlem Youth Opportunities Unlimited, also known as HARU, and other groups. These strikes were to have the city force landlords to improve the quality of housing by bringing them up to code, to take action against rats and roaches, provide heat during the winter, and to keep prices in line with existing rent control regulations. In central Harlem, asthma was more common in children compared to other New York City neighborhoods. This was mostly due to substandard housing conditions like inadequate heating, cracks and holes, water leaks, the presence of rat or mice as mentioned prior, peeling paints, the presence of mold, moisture, and dust mites. Central Harlem tracked worse in regards to home maintenance conditions in 2014 compared to the average rate in Manhattan and New York City. 20% of homes had cracks and holes, 21% had leaks, and 19% had 3 or more maintenance deficiencies. Education in Harlem in the mid-20th century was of low quality. In the 1960s, roughly about 75% of students in Harlem tested under grade levels in reading skills, and about 80% tested under grade levels in math. There were 2 school boycotts to call attention to the problem in 1964. 92% of students stayed home in central Harlem. Murder rate was 6 times higher than New York's average. Half of the children in Harlem grew up with one parent or none, and lack of supervision contributed to juvenile delinquency. About 100 murders were reported per year in Harlem statistically from 1940, but rape was very rare, perhaps because they were hardly being reported. Harlem was home to the Sicilian Mafia and Italian organized crime groups, and later on, a stronghold of the Italian-American Mafia in the early 20th century. Black criminal groups began to organize themselves similarly as ethnic composition of the neighborhood changed. However, the black gangs did not compete with the established mobs. They focused on the policy racket, also called the numbers game or boleta in East Harlem. It was a gambling scheme similar to playing a lottery and was played illegally from many locations around Harlem. But especially, it was predominantly played in Harlem's poor black neighborhoods. It became the largest American black-owned business during the 1920s. The game consisted of picking 3-digit numbers from 0 to 999. A player could bet any amount. It could even be a nickel or a dime. The winning number was taken each day from a source that the promoters of the game couldn't control. For example, a race result or the stock exchange. The total money at play in the early 1950s amounted to billions of dollars. The police force had been thoroughly corrupted by bribes from numbers bosses who financially became extremely wealthy and provided capitals for loans for those who could not qualify for them through a traditional financial institution. The numbers bosses also invested in real estate and other legitimate businesses. One of the early numbers bosses was a woman named Madame Stephanie St. Clair, who exchanged lethal gun battles with mobster Dutch Schultz when she refused to hand over her numbers trade to him and be employed under him. Oh, oh, Later, a man named Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, who was Madame Stephanie St. Clair's personal bodyguard and who was popularly known as Bumpy Johnson, opened his own numbers game. The TV series The Godfather of Harlem, which aired on Epix, was based on true events which took place during that era. Thanks to the popularity of the numbers game, state lottery was introduced. This was legal and had lower payouts with taxes collected on winnings. By the 1950s, many whites left Harlem, and by 1960, the black middle class will also depart as well. During this time, control of organized crime shifted from the Italian group to local blacks. Puerto Rican and Cuban groups were not formally organized. Also, the drug addiction rate in Harlem was 10 times higher than the New York City average during the time of the 1964 riots, and 12 times higher than the United States as a whole. About 15 to 20,000 of 30,000 estimated drug addicts in New York City lived in Harlem. Between 1953 and 1962, the crime rate among young people increased throughout New York City, but was consistently 50% higher in Harlem than in New York City as a whole.
I would stick up, I would steal.
Through the 1950s and 1960s, the injecting of heroin grew in popularity in Harlem, though the use of this drug then leveled off. In the 1980s, use of crack cocaine became widespread, which produced collateral crime as addicts stole to finance their purchasing of additional drugs and as dealers fought for the right to sell in particular regions or over deals gone bad. Besides mob groups, there were numerous gangs in Harlem. Most of them were based in housing projects. Revenge violence can erupt and last for years when one gang member is killed by another gang. One of the most popular gangs, which operated in East Harlem and its surroundings in the 1970s, known as the East Harlem Purple Gang, was an Italian-American group of hitmen and heroin dealers. Harlem and its gangsters have a strong link to hip-hop, rap, and R&B culture in the United States. Many successful rappers in the music industry came from gangs in Harlem. Rappers like Tupac, who is my favorite rapper of all times, Jim Jones, and Cameron were all born and raised in Harlem. Gangster rap, which has its origin in the late 1980s, often has lyrics that are misogynistic or that glamorizes violence, glamorizes guns, drugs, and easy women in Harlem and New York City. By the 1970s, many of Harlem's residents who were able to escape from poverty left the neighborhood in search of better schools, better homes, and safer streets. Those who remained were the poorest and least skilled, with the fewest opportunities for success. The federal government spends $100 million on job training, healthcare, education, public safety, sanitation, housing, and other projects under the Model City program over a 10-year period, but Harlem showed no improvement. The city began auctioning its enormous portfolio of Harlem properties to the public in 1985. This was intended to improve the community by placing property in the hands of people who would live in them and maintain them. In many cases, the city would even pay to completely renovate a property before selling it below market value or by lottery. Although Harlem ceased to be home to a majority of the city's black people, in the post-World War II era, it remained the cultural and political capital of Black New York and possibly Black America. In the 21st century, crime rates in Harlem dropped significantly with the end of the crack wars in the mid-1990s and with the initiation of aggressive policing under mayors David Dinkins and his successor Rudy Giuliani. That was when Harlem started to gentrify. Compared to in 1981, when 6,500 robberies were reported in Harlem, reports of robberies dropped to 4,800 in 1990, to 1,700 in 2000, and to 1,100 in 2010. Within the 28th and 32nd precincts, there have been similar changes in all categories of crimes tracked by the NYPD. After the 1990s, Harlem began to grow again. Between 1990 and 2006, the neighborhood's population grew by 16.9%, with the percentage of black people decreasing from 87.6% to 69.3%, then dropping to 54.4% by 2010. The percentage of whites increased from 1.5% to 6.6% by 2006, and to almost 10% by 2010. A renovation of 125th Street and new properties along the thoroughfare also helped to revitalize Harlem. New York City subway and local bus routes serve the neighborhood of Harlem. Today, Harlem has several public elementary, middle, and high schools. Harlem is also close to several colleges, including the City College of New York and Columbia University. Some historic places to visit in Harlem is the Hamilton Grange National Memorial, located on 414 on West 141st Street in St. Nicholas Park in Manhattan, New York City. It was a country home to founding father Alexander Hamilton. It was designed by architect John McComb Jr. and used to sit on a 32 acres estate in Upper Manhattan on Convent Avenue and 141st Street. The Grange, which was named after Hamilton's grandfather's own holdings in Scotland, is a two-story frame federal-style house completed in 1802, 2 years before Hamilton's death resulting from a duel with Aaron Burr on July 11, 1804. It was the only home Hamilton ever owned. The estate remained in his family for 30 years after his death till it became a National Historic Landmark in December of 1960. Another landmark to visit is the Langston Hughes residence in Central Harlem located on 20 East 127th Street in Harlem, New York City. It was given the landmark status by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in Langston's memory. Langston Hughes is known for his colorful portrayals of Black life in America from the 20s to the 60s through novels, short stories, plays, as well as poetry. He is also known for his engagement in the world of jazz and the influence it had on his writing, especially in Montage of a Dream Deferred. His work in his lifetime were enormously important in shaping the artistic contributions of the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s. He was born on February 1, 1902 and died of complications from prostate cancer in May 22 in 1967 in New York. Today, not only is Harlem a safer community than it was many years ago, but it has such great diversity of people with migrations from all around the world and still remains a community with so much arts and culture amongst its residents. There are many dining hotspots or restaurants with great food like Ponte Bistro on 2375 on Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard and the Red Rooster on 310 Lenox Avenue in Harlem, New York. There is a plethora of small shops and tiny bakeries like Levion Bakery on 2165 Frederick Douglass Boulevard, where you can grab a bite of their signature oversized chocolate chip cookies, brioche, scones, and more. These are some of the things Harlemers had to say about their community.
It's your one-stop shop. You get it's very convenient. Me living and working close to the area, I can get everything I need. You can get your food, which is very diverse, you get your clothing, very diverse, and the people are very mixy as well. You have your mix of the ratchet, but you have your mix of like old school West Side Harlem, which is very classic, I guess, nostalgic. Nice. Very diverse.
Right.
Yeah. The foods are diverse. You can get anything that you want to eat. Sorry.
us. That's us. I mean, I went to NYU. Yeah, I've been here for like 4 years now. We're going to the park first, and we're gonna have a picnic. I think park right over here. Yeah, St. Nicholas Park. We love St. Nicholas Park, and then the Honeywell has really good drinks, so we might go there after. It's a little uptown, and I think like my favorite thing about this neighborhood is probably like the restaurants. Monte Bistro is my favorite restaurant in this entire neighborhood. Yeah. Oh, you do? He always comes around and like greets everyone and says hi. It's really sweet. Yeah. There's a new like coffee shop called Ink Harlem that's really sweet. That's next to Bell. You guys have been there, which is really nice. The culture, the people. Yeah. It's a very solid culture for sure.
There are fascinating activities happening inside the community, either on the streets like buskers performances, also known as street musicians or free street music and art. And in the parks, you will find activities like chess games, basketball games, and family picnics. There are art galleries like the Health Gallery on 24 West and 120th Street and the Kente Royal Gallery at 2373 on Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, 2 doors away from Ponte Bistro, all which will capture your spirit and hold your attention for as long as you want to indulge yourself in. I was so delighted to be reminded of my own culture in Ghana when we stumbled upon a group of African drummers in Marcus Garvey Park. It was therapeutic for me as I watched the drummers get in touch with their inner self. There was a nice woman dressed in an all-white African attire, holding a green bottle in her right hand and a burning incense in her left hand, and going around the circle, cleansing away evil. She later joined another woman on the dance floor, and together they would dance beautifully to the rhythm of the drums.
Brother, great job on that flute. Just what you needed.
With a fountain,
Yes, Bethesda, 72nd.
Yeah, exactly. That's on Saturday and Sunday, right?
Yeah, we usually over Western Harlem or Adam Clayton Powell, but we walked over today, you know.
Yeah, man, like I said, this been going on for a while.
Good. You turned him on to that, huh?
I told you? Yeah.
That's good.
When we got together, I used to sell things, and I said, I think we should be playing a flute. She said, but he was a boy, he made flutes, and he hadn't played one since he came from Jamaica. So I gave him one little one like this. In front of his shoulder with a bottle.
Nice. It's really nice.
I couldn't help but to dance myself as I continued to observe the drummers. It was as if they were drumming out their feelings without saying a word. I was in awe of the ensemble, the camaraderie, the self-expression through their instrument and being in sync with the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Their hands were on nothing but fun, fun, fun. The whole atmosphere was booming, jumping, and so rejuvenating. The park in which they played used to be called Mount Morris Park. It was created in 1840 and was originally named for Robert Morris, who was then the mayor of New York City. It was renamed Marcus Garvey Park in 1973 after the Jamaican political activist who was also a businessman, orator, and a journalist. There is so much more history about his life which I won't get into in today's video. In short, his ideas came to be known as Garveyism. Before it was renamed Marcus Garvey Park in 1973, the Harlem Mount Morris Park staged a series of free concerts over 6 weekends that drew over 300,000 people in attendance to what was known as the Harlem Cultural Festival in the summer of 1969. The event was colloquially known as the Black Woodstock, but it took place weeks before the Woodstock Festival in upstate New York. The event attracted famous artists like Stevie Wonder, Nina Simone, Gladys Knight, The Fifth Dimension, Sly and the Family Stone, and David Ruffin from The Temptations. Filmmaker Hal Tolchin, who captured the festival in its entirety, tried to sell the footage to studios who turned him down. As a result, it sat in Tolchin's basement for half a century until his death in 2017, when producers David Dynastine and Robert Fairbairn obtained the never-before-seen footage, one that no one knew existed or that the concert even ever took place. Most people before my generation and even during my generation have heard about the musical festival which took place in Woodstock in upstate New York. But unless you were born in the 1969 era, living in Harlem or its neighboring towns, or have a friend who invited you out during the 6-week period when the festival was ongoing, my guess will be that it is very likely that you have never heard of a Harlem Cultural Festival. According to the Root drummer Amir Thompson, whom you might know by the stage name Questlove, its footage existed but was never shown because of a few reasons. One being racial injustices and anti-war protests and general ambivalence to the landing on the moon in that period. Or perhaps because one concert goer made a statement in newsreel saying, "Never mind the moon, let's get that cash to feed poor black people in Harlem." And so, just like most black cultural history has been erased from history books and considered insignificant, the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival was erased until its airing at the virtual Sundance Film Festival. It was finally featured in a documentary titled Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, and was released this summer on July 2nd, 2021 on Hulu and in theaters. Two important civil rights activists worth remembering during the Harlem Renaissance in the mid-50s and the late 60s are Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X.
I have a dream. My poor little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist minister and a social activist, whose involvement in the NAACP movement began during the Bass boycott of 1955, played a key role in the American civil rights movement by preaching and using nonviolence to fight for equal rights and racial integration from the mid-1950s till his assassination on April 4, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee.
which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Malcolm X, an African-American Muslim minister and human rights activist, was also a popular figure in the civil rights movement in Harlem. He advocated for Black empowerment and promoted the practice of Islam within the Black community in the 1950s till his assassination on February 21, 1965 in New York City. One thing he was very proud of was his involvement in the nation's social welfare free drug rehabilitation program in Harlem during the drug epidemic. The program offered any drug addicts willing to detoxify free drug rehabilitation and housing during treatment. This Statue of Liberty is currently on display at the Morningside Park in Harlem till the end of October. So between now and October of 2021, you can also stop by and strike a pose with this statue and be reminded again of how fortunate we are to live in a country where we can find comfort in our democracy, which is truly a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, as Lincoln stated, and also where freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear protects all citizens and the oppressed, as Franklin Roosevelt wanted for all mankind. And so, with all that said, Harlem in this modern era is a place to visit, a place to consider your future home or opening a future business. It is diverse, welcoming, and mostly developed. Like any neighborhood, it will have crime every now and then, but certainly nothing near to what it used to be. There is nothing to be afraid of in Harlem than fear itself. I hope that you will get to visit some of the historic places mentioned in this video, as well as the restaurants and museums. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please don't forget to click the like button below this video. Leave suggestions and all comments below in the comment section. And if you're new to my stage, your platform, welcome. Remember to click the subscribe button on the right side of this video to be notified of future ones. It is free, and free. To my subscribers, thanks for the continued support. Till next time, be safe and smart, and cheers.